Hey guys, in today's video, I will share an emotional story full of profound revelations. Imagine facing a journey that leads to hell and there, encountering a surprising figure, a millionaire whose shocking truth changed everything for our protagonist. If you want to know how this encounter transformed her life, stay with us until the end. Don't forget to comment below which city you're from and, of course, subscribe to the channel for more incredible stories like this. Let's go on this journey of discovery together. Hello, my name is Ophelia Marquette. Before I begin, I want to make it clear that I am not a writer, nor a public figure, nor anything like that. I'm just someone who has been through something extraordinary and feels the need to share. Like many people who have a near-death experience, or NDE as some call it, I was very reluctant to talk about it. In fact, I spent years keeping this story with me until I realized that maybe it could help other people. I'm 35 years old and, until recently, I lived what many would call the perfect life in Austin, Texas. You know those family photos we see on social media? Smiling husband, beautiful children, tidy house, everything in order. This is what my life looked like on the outside. Gareth, my husband, was considered the ideal man by our friends. "You were lucky, Ophelia," they always said. Our two children were the joy of the house, always so smart and affectionate. I remember one morning, just before everything fell apart, when I was making breakfast for the kids. Tommy, my youngest, and said something that today seems like a premonition. "Mommy, why do adults sometimes seem happy on the outside but sad on the inside?" Right away, I gave that typical mom response. Something about how we all have good days and bad days. Little did I know that I was about to discover how much of a facade my own life was. It was on a Tuesday that I found out about Gareth's betrayal. I was organizing some accounts on my computer when I found emails that I shouldn't have found. The kind of thing you read and reread, wanting to believe there was some mistake. I confronted him that same night, after the kids went to bed. "It's all a misunderstanding," he said, with that irritating calm he always had. "You're seeing things that don't exist." But they existed, and it wasn't just emails. I soon discovered that there was another home, another life, other plans that didn't include me. The person I thought I had known for years was a complete stranger. A week later, I came home from work and found the house empty. Not just empty of people, but empty of life. The children's clothes, favorite toys, photos, everything was gone. Gareth had taken our children. He just left a note on the fridge. "It's better this way." It was around this time that I met Jackson Hart, or Jax as everyone called him. He frequented the same cafe I went to every morning, trying to maintain some sort of routine while searching for clues as to my children's whereabouts. We started talking because he was also going through problems. He had that look of someone who knew pain, you know, the kind of look that recognizes another like it. "Sometimes we need a little help to cope," he said one day, offering something that would change my life forever. At the time, it seemed like a solution. After all, what did I have to lose? I had already lost everything, hadn't I? How wrong I was. That summer night in Austin was particularly sweltering. It was one of those days when the Texas heat seemed to create a bubble around the city, where even breathing became an effort. I was alone in my room, the curtains closed, allowing only a sliver of light from the street lamp to enter. The air conditioning hummed softly, trying futilely to combat the heat I felt inside. I had used more drugs than usual that night, much more. Jax had warned me to be careful, his words still echoing in my mind. "Slow down, Ophelia. This isn't you." But who was I anyway? The abandoned wife? The mother who lost her children? The woman who now looked in the mirror and barely recognized herself? The digital clock on the table said 11:42 p.m. I remember exactly because I stared at those red numbers for what seemed like an infinite amount of time. They began to dance in front of me, shuffling around like they were liquids. I tried to get out of bed, but my body wasn't responding properly. It was as if there was a mismatch between my brain and my muscles. That's when I started to feel that cold. It wasn't a normal cold, the kind that a blanket solves. It was a cold that came from within, that started at the tips of my fingers and went up my arms like little needles of ice. "Help!" I tried to scream, but my voice came out as just a whisper. The air began to feel heavy, as if someone was gradually increasing the gravity of the room. My heart was beating so loudly I could hear it, a sound that became increasingly irregular. The walls of the room began to move, billowing like curtains in the wind. The few objects he could see through the dim light seemed distorted, as if in a surrealist painting. I tried to reach my cell phone on the coffee table, but my arm weighed a ton. "Please, God," I murmured, feeling the panic rising. "Please don't let me die like this." That's when I started to hear distant music. It wasn't something that was playing in the room or coming from the street. It was as if it were inside my head, but at the same time it seemed to come from far away. A melody I had never heard before, but somehow felt familiar. The last thing I remember was seeing a shadow moving in the corner of the room. I tried to focus on her, but my vision was too blurry. It felt like I was being pulled down as if I were sinking into quicksand. I fought this feeling with all the strength I had left, but it was useless. "Tommy. Sarah." I whispered my children's names before everything went dark. The first thing I noticed was the silence, a silence unlike anything I had ever experienced, as if the very concept of sound had ceased to exist. I opened my eyes, or at least I thought I had, and saw myself floating above my own body. It was an indescribable feeling. I could see every detail of the room with surreal clarity, as if my eyes had gained a new kind of vision. My body was there, lying on the bed, looking so small and fragile, the arms still stretched towards the table, the hair spread out on the pillow, the expression on the face strangely serene. "This can't be happening," I thought, but my voice sounded different, like it was in all directions at once. It was then that I saw the tunnel forming. It started as a small point of light on what appeared to be the ceiling of the room, but quickly expanded. The walls of the tunnel were not solid. They were made of an energy that pulsed in shades of blue and white that do not exist in our world. It was as if every particle of light was alive, dancing in perfect choreography. I felt a force pulling me towards the tunnel. It wasn't a violent force, but it was irresistible, like gravity, only in reverse. I tried to fight at first, the fear of the unknown still present. "Don't be afraid," I heard a voice say. It wasn't a voice coming from any specific place, and it was as if the tunnel itself was speaking to me. "This is just the beginning of your journey." As I went up the tunnel, I started to hear music. It was the same melody I had heard before, only now much clearer. It was as if thousands of voices were singing in perfect harmony, but at the same time, it wasn't exactly a sound. It was more as if the light itself had a song of its own. Time seemed to not exist there. I can't tell if I spent minutes or hours in that tunnel. Every moment stretched into infinity, and at the same time, everything seemed to happen in the blink of an eye. I began to see flashes of my life passing around me, as if they were projected onto the tunnel walls. I saw my childhood, the moments with my grandmother Rose, my marriage to Gareth, the birth of my children. Each memory was more vivid than the original, as if I was reliving each moment with a new perspective. I also saw moments I had forgotten, little gestures of kindness I received, kind words I ignored, opportunities to help I passed up. It's amazing how we only realize the value of things when we're about to lose them, I thought, watching all those memories pass by like a high-definition movie. It was then that I felt the change. The light began to dim, and the music was replaced by other sounds I would have preferred not to have ever heard. The change was so abrupt that it caught me completely off guard. The welcoming light of the tunnel began to turn into a dense, suffocating darkness. It was as if all the peace I had felt moments before was being sucked away by an invisible vacuum. The first impact was the smell. A strong sulfur odor invaded my senses, so intense that, if I had still been in my physical body, I would certainly have vomited. It was a smell of decay, of burning, of death, all mixed together in a nauseating combination. "No, please don't," I murmured to no one in particular, feeling a primal fear wash over me. The temperature began to rise dramatically. It wasn't like the heat of Texas. It was something much deeper, a heat that seemed to burn the very essence of my being. I found myself descending towards a landscape that defied any earthly description. The ground was a grotesque mixture of black rocks and what appeared to be molten metal, forming patterns that resembled faces in agony. Rivers of lava flowed between the rock formations, emitting a sickly red glow that only accentuated the horror of the place. It was then that I heard them, the screams. My God, the screams. They came from all directions, an endless chorus of suffering that penetrated every fiber of my being. These were not normal screams of physical pain. They were the wails of souls in eternal torment. "Mommy, Mommy!" I heard a voice that sounded like Tommy's. My heart, or whatever I still had in that form, froze. Tommy? I screamed in desperation, frantically searching around me. But it wasn't him. It was just another of the tortures of that place, making you listen to the voices you love most in agony. I began to see lost souls. Some wandered aimlessly, like zombies, with blank expressions that suggested they had been there so long they had forgotten who they were. Others writhed in agony, trapped in their own private tortures. I saw people trying to climb mountains that never ended, others running from shadows that chased them forever. A figure approached me, or rather, floated towards me. It was a woman, or what was left of her. His eyes were black pits of despair, and when he spoke, his voice was like 1,000 agonized whispers. "You don't belong here, yet," she said, her face contorting into something that might have been a smile. "But it will come back one day. Everyone does." I tried to move away from her, but it seemed like the more I moved, the more tormented souls gathered around me. That's when I saw him, a figure that was strangely familiar to me, sitting alone on an obsidian rock. It was him, the millionaire from Austin, the man I had seen so many times on the city's social pages. I recognized him immediately, even though his appearance had changed drastically. Robert Maxwell III, the Austin real estate mogul famous for his luxurious mansions and extravagant parties. But there, in that place of torment, he was unrecognizable. His designer clothes had been replaced by singed rags, and his face, previously always smiling in social columns, was marked by an expression of deep regret. I approached him, moved by a mixture of curiosity and compassion. He was sitting on an obsidian rock, staring at what appeared to be a burning newspaper that never completely consumed itself. The headlines were constantly changing, showing all the lives he had destroyed in the name of profit. "Mr. Maxwell," I called, my voice shaking. He looked up slowly, and what I saw in them made me flinch. It was a look that carried the weight of eternity, a look that he had seen too much and now he couldn't forget. One more visit," he said, his voice sounding like paper being torn. "Come to see what happens to the rich and powerful when they get here." Before I could respond, a soft light appeared beside me. It was an angelic being, its presence bringing momentary relief to the horror around us. When he spoke, his voice was like music amid the cacophony of shouts. "It's not the money that condemns, but what we do with it," said the angel, his compassionate gaze alternating between me and Maxwell. The millionaire let out a bitter laugh that sounded more like a sob. "Do you know how many families I evicted?" he began, the words coming out in a torrent. "How many lives did I destroy to build yet another luxury condominium? I used to say it was just business, that's just how the market is." As he spoke, the burning newspaper showed images, a mother crying while holding her children, watching her house being demolished, an elderly man being forced to leave the place where he has lived his entire life, entire families having to sleep on the streets because he had bought and closed the only shelter in the region. "The worst thing," he continued, his voice breaking, "is that I had so much money. I could have helped all those people and I would still be rich. But greed never ends, does it?" The angel placed a hand on my shoulder. "Watch carefully," he said softly. "Here, all the masks fall. All the power, all the wealth in the world means nothing when we confront the consequences of our choices." Maxwell stood up suddenly, holding out his hands to me in a gesture of supplication. "If you come back, if you get that chance, tell them it's not how much you have that matters, but what you do with this, say." But before he could finish, a shadow enveloped him, dragging him back to his private torment. Their screams joined the endless chorus of laments that echoed through that cursed place. The horror of that place was becoming unbearable. Every second felt like an eternity, and I could feel my consciousness beginning to fragment under the weight of so much suffering. Then something changed, something so subtle at first that I almost didn't notice it. First, it was a breeze. In the midst of that infernal heat, I felt a gentle touch of cool air on my face. It was so incongruous with the surroundings that for a moment I thought I was imagining it. But then the breeze grew stronger, bringing with it a scent that reminded me of my grandmother Rose's gardens. "Daughter," I heard a voice call. It wasn't like the other voices in that place. There was no agony or despair in it. It was like music, like the sound of crystal bells ringing in the wind. I turned towards the voice and saw him, a being of light so bright that at any other time it would have blinded me. But there, in that non-physical form, I could behold him in all his glory. He was dressed in a robe that seemed to be made of liquid light, constantly changing color like the aurora borealis. His face emanated such deep compassion that it brought me to my knees. "The time has come to leave this valley of shadows," he said, extending his hand to me. When I touched it, it was like diving into an ocean of peace. All the tormented voices, all the cries of despair began to fade away. "But do I deserve to leave here?" I asked, tears streaming down my face. "After everything I did, the drugs, the way I gave up my kids." The being of light smiled, and in that smile, there was more love than in all the words ever spoken in the history of humanity. "True repentance is the first step to redemption," he replied, and his heart, even in the midst of so much pain, never lost the capacity to love. As he spoke, I began to feel my body, or whatever shape I had there, becoming lighter. The darkness around us began to dissipate like mist in the morning sun. The smell of sulfur was replaced by a fragrance that reminded me of all the good things in life: freshly baked bread, flowers after the rain, the scent of my children when they were babies. "Close your eyes," the being of light instructed softly, "and let yourself go." I obeyed, and when I did, I felt like I was being wrapped in a cocoon of pure light. It was like being hugged by 1,000 mothers at the same time, like diving into an ocean of unconditional love. I began to hear a song, not with my ears, but with every particle of my being. It was a harmony so perfect that it made all the music on earth seem like mere noise in comparison. "Open your eyes now," the being's melodious voice suggested, "and see where your heart always belonged." When I opened my eyes, the hell had completely disappeared. I was in a place so beautiful that all the words in the world would be insufficient to describe it. But before I could fully absorb this new reality, I saw a familiar figure approaching. My grandmother Rose, just as I remembered her from my childhood summers. The place where I found myself now was a field that seemed to stretch infinitely in all directions. The grass was an impossible green, dotted with flowers that gave off their own light. The sky, well, calling it heaven is reducing it too much. It was as if all the colors in the universe were dancing together in perfect harmony. Grandma Rose was standing a few feet away from me, wearing that same flowery dress she loved so much. His white hair shone with a light of its own, and his face, oh, his face. She was radiant in a way I had never seen during her earthly life. All the worry lines were gone, but the eyes still had that same loving glow that I knew so well. "My little Ophelia," she said, opening her arms. I ran to her like I had as a child, and when we hugged, it was as if all the suffering I had been through, the drugs, the loss of my children, the hell I had just witnessed, had been washed away by a wave of pure love. "Grandma," I sobbed in her arms, "I missed you so much. I wish I could talk to you so many times, ask for your advice." She stroked my hair like she did when I was little. "I was always with you, darling. In the darkest moments, it was me whispering in your heart not to give up." We sat on a bench that seemed to be made of crystallized light. Time there had a different quality, as if every moment was eternal and instantaneous at the same time. I told her everything, about Gareth, about the boys, about how I had lost myself to drugs. You know," she said, after listening to me with that infinite patience she always had, "sometimes we need to lose ourselves completely to truly find ourselves. Do you remember that garden I had at home?" I nodded, remembering the roses she cultivated with so much care. "Remember how the most beautiful ones grew right where I had pruned them the hardest? Sometimes we need to be pruned almost to the roots to really bloom. You, my dear, are about to bloom." "But how, Grandma? After everything I've done?" She held my hands in hers. His hands were warm, vibrating with an energy that conveyed peace and love. "Ophelia, you still have a purpose to fulfill. Your experiences, even the most painful ones, and especially the most painful ones, will be like seeds that you can plant in the hearts of others who are lost." While talking to my grandmother Rose, I felt a change in the environment around us. The air seemed to become denser, more charged with energy. The flowers around us began to glow more brightly, and soft music, unlike anything I had ever heard on earth, filled the entire space. Grandma Rose smiled, her eyes filling with tears of joy. "He's coming," she said simply, squeezing my hands tighter. It was then that I saw him. It wasn't like the movies or church paintings. There were no trumpets or angels announcing his arrival, just that indescribable presence that made everything else seem pale in comparison. Jesus approached us with steps that seemed to float over the luminous grass, Your eyes. How to describe those eyes? It was as if all the love in the universe was concentrated in that look. When he looked at me, I felt like every moment of my life was being seen and understood completely. There was no judgment in that look, just a love so deep it made me cry instantly. "My daughter," he said, his voice resonating not just in my ears but in every fiber of my being. "You walked through dark valleys. I'm so sorry," I managed to say between sobs. I lost myself so much. He sat next to me, and the bench seemed to expand to accommodate him perfectly. His cloak, which seemed to be woven from starlight itself, brushed lightly against my hand, sending waves of peace throughout my body. "Ophelia." He said my name in a way that made it sound like the most beautiful of songs. "You were never truly lost, even in the darkest moments. When you yourself had given up, I was there. But the drugs, the way I abandoned my children." "You didn't abandon them," he interrupted me gently. "They were taken from you. And as for the drugs, sometimes we need to know the darkness to truly appreciate the light." Jesus reached out his hand and touched my face, wiping away my tears. In that moment, I saw flashes of my life, not just the bad moments, but the good ones too. My children's first smile, the afternoons in the garden with Grandma Rose, even little moments of kindness that I had forgotten. "You have a greater purpose than you know," he continued. "Your journey through the valley of shadows was not in vain. Every tear, every moment of pain, every battle you faced will be turned into light to illuminate the path of others." "But how?" I asked. "How can I help anyone after everything I've done?" He smiled, and in that smile I saw the promise of redemption, of a fresh start, of hope. "It is precisely because of what you have experienced that you will be able to help. Your scars will be bridges to reach those who are where you were. Your testimony will be living proof that there is always hope. There is always a way back to the light." Grandma Rose, who had remained silent during our conversation, took my other hand. The three of us were there, in a moment that seemed to contain all eternity. "You will return," Jesus said finally. "And when things get hard, remember this moment. Remember that you are never alone." "But I'm so scared," I confessed. "Was fear of failing again, of not being strong enough. My strength is made perfect in weakness," he replied, quoting words I had heard before, but which now took on a completely new meaning. "Do not be afraid of your weaknesses. They are what allow my light to shine through you." The way back was different from the way there. There was no tunnel this time, just a gradual feeling of heaviness returning to my body. The sounds of paradise were being replaced by the rhythmic beeps of hospital machines. The scent of heavenly flowers gave way to the characteristic smell of a hospital, antiseptic and medicine. The first thing I felt was pain, an intense physical pain that reminded me I was back in the material world. I tried to open my eyes, but my eyelids felt like they weighed tons. I heard voices around me, muffled as if they were coming from far away. "She's coming back. Pressure stabilizing. Call the doctor." When I finally managed to open my eyes, the hospital's fluorescent light momentarily blinded me. A nurse leaned over me, her eyes showing a mix of relief and concern. "Welcome back," she said softly. "You gave us quite a scare." I tried to speak, but my throat was too dry. The nurse offered a small glass of water with a straw. As I drank, I realized that something had fundamentally changed within me. The feeling of emptiness, that black hole that the drugs tried to fill, had disappeared. The days that followed in the hospital were a whirlwind of exams, visits from social workers, and sessions with psychologists. Everyone wanted to know what had happened, why he had used so many drugs, whether it had been a suicide attempt, how to explain it to them, how to put into earthly words an experience that transcended any human language. "You were very lucky," the doctor said during the morning visit. "It was very close." I smiled, thinking about how he had no idea how profound my journey had been. The luck he mentioned had a name, had eyes full of love, had a greater purpose than anyone there could imagine. Recovery was not easy. The body demands what it is used to, and drugs had become part of my system for too long. But this time it was different. Each time withdrawal hit hard, I closed my eyes and remembered Grandma Rose's hug, Jesus' eyes, even the horror of hell. It all served as an anchor to keep me steady on the path to recovery. I voluntarily checked myself into a rehab center outside of Austin. It was a simple but welcoming place. For the first few weeks, I could barely sleep. I kept looking out my bedroom window, going over every detail of my experience, afraid of forgetting something. You look different, said Maria, my roommate at the center. Most people here have a lost look, but your eyes have something different. How could I explain to her that I had seen beyond the veil that separates this life from the next? I chose to just smile and hold her hand when she cried during withdrawals. The search for my children continued, now with new energy. It was no longer that desperate and self-destructive search. I had an inner certainty that I would meet them at the right time. I started using social media more actively, always posting messages for them, hoping that one day they would see it. And then, on an ordinary spring Sunday, it happened. I was checking my email when I saw a message that made my heart stop. Mom, it's us, Tommy and Sarah. My hands were shaking so much that I could barely hold the cell phone. The message continued. We saw your posts. Dad told us a different version of what happened, but now we're old enough to seek the truth on our own. Can we meet? The reunion took place 2 weeks later, in a public park in Austin. When I saw them approaching, I could hardly believe how much they had grown. Tommy, my youngest, was now taller than me. Sarah had the same expressive eyes as always, but now there was a maturity in them that tugged at my heart. Mom, Sarah said simply, and in that single word were years of pent-up longing. The three of us hugged, right there in the middle of the park, crying and laughing at the same time. You look different, Tommy commented later, as we sat eating ice cream. More, at peace. A lot has happened, I replied, choosing my words carefully. I went through very difficult times, but also experiences that completely changed my life. It was at that time that I decided to fulfill an old dream, to visit Japan. I saved for months and finally managed to make the trip in 2011. Fate wanted me to be there during the Fukushima earthquake. Seeing that devastation, that uncontrollable power of nature, reminded me how precious and fragile life is. During the earthquake, while helping with a makeshift shelter, an elderly Japanese woman held my hand and said something in Japanese that was later translated to me. Your eyes know pain, but they also know peace. At that moment, I thought about how my near-death experience had prepared me even for that situation. I felt no fear during the earthquake, just a deep connection with all those people who were going through their own trying times. Today, my life is different. Tommy and Sarah spend the weekends with me. I volunteer at a rehabilitation center, not as an official counselor, but as someone who is simply there to listen, to hold the hand of anyone in need, to say, I know what you're going through, and really mean it. I didn't create any groups. I didn't write books. I don't give talks. My mission is quieter, more personal. Sometimes, on the quietest nights, I still smell that perfume of paradise flowers. I still hear echoes of that heavenly music, and I smile, knowing that every moment of pain in my life has brought me exactly where I'm supposed to be. As a quote I read somewhere goes, sometimes God allows you to hit rock bottom only to discover that He is the rock at the bottom. I didn't just touch bottom, I went beyond it, saw hell and heaven, and came back to tell the story. Not to gain fame or recognition, but to be a witness that there is always hope, there is always a way back to the light. And now, when someone asks me if I'm afraid of death, I smile and say no, because I know that death is not the end. It is just a gateway to something much greater than we can imagine here. But I also know that every moment in this life is precious. Every breath is a gift. Every opportunity to love and help is sacred. This is my story. It is not a success story in the terms that the world usually values. It is a story of fall and redemption, of darkness and light, of death and rebirth. It's a story that continues to be written, one day at a time, one hug at a time, one life transformed at a time. And maybe, just maybe, someone going through their own valley of shadows will read these words and find a little hope. Because if there's one thing I've learned on my journey, it's that none of us are truly alone. Even in the darkest moments, there is a light guiding our path back home.